welcome to In the Loop. I'm Shane Finster, and we are joined today by Beau Evans with the Governor's Highway Safety Program.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. The topic we're going to talk about today is pedestrian safety. So this is a topic that I think plays well year-round because we need to not only be mindful of those in vehicles around us, but also those who are on foot. We are in a tri-state area here where you have the opportunity to travel by vehicle into lots of smaller and larger areas with some locations with crosswalks, some without, and varying rates of speed when you're trying to get across the roadways. So let's kick off the topic, I think, with intersections. Seems like the most obvious place to me where you may need to be hyper aware of pedestrians, or maybe not. Let's see what you think.
You need to be aware of pedestrians at intersections, but also anywhere and everywhere. Pedestrians, in its nature, typically will cross at an intersection or at a crosswalk. Some pedestrians don't do that. Some pedestrians, they come out of a building and they need to get to another building that's right across the street. That could simply just be darting right across the street. Any time that a pedestrian is going to cross the street, there's just a rule. No matter if you're crossing at a crosswalk or if you're waiting for the light to change in an intersection to cross the crosswalk, you need to make sure that you look both ways. And you may need to do that a couple times. Look left, look right, and then look back to your left again. Also, if you're crossing the street at where another street comes up behind you, then you'll need to look back over your shoulder to make sure that there's nobody getting ready to turn into you as you're getting ready to cross. So, pedestrians can cross out of nowhere. A lot of drivers think that just intersections are the only place that pedestrians can cross. That's not true. Over in Huntington, you can cross midway at a midway crosswalk. Mm-hmm. If that midway crosswalk is labeled and available, then pedestrians can cross at those. And drivers are having to yield at those locations. There's a sign there that says the driver needs to yield to pedestrians there. Not all drivers yield to pedestrians. So it's kind of a two-way street on this. If there is a crosswalk and the pedestrian is allowed to go, they have a walk symbol set up, or the driver has to yield, there's a yield sign to the pedestrian, then the driver must stop and yield to that pedestrian. Same thing if there's a stop hand up at the crosswalk, or if it's flashing, getting ready to turn to a solid hand showing, then the pedestrian needs to either finish walking across or stay right there where they are on the sidewalk before the next cycle goes through before they could walk across the street. And when you walk across the street, just don't dilly-dally, Don't just stand there in the middle of the street. The drivers are expecting you to walk across the street, so try to get over there safely as possible. Don't run by any means, but get across. Just don't stand there and look at the sun or the road or other cars.
Selfies in the middle
of the street. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So are there state laws requiring a driver to yield to pedestrians, or is it a courtesy?
There is laws on the books for yielding to pedestrians. There's also laws on the books where pedestrians need to also yield to vehicles as well. So anytime that there may be a case where a pedestrian gets hit by a car, law enforcement will have to do an investigation to see who was at fault in that situation. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't matter who's at fault. Both parties are really shooken up. They're both. The driver feels extremely upset for hitting somebody. They never want to. You don't get in the car every day and think that you're gonna, I'm gonna go hit somebody today. So that's something that a driver never wants to deal with. And a pedestrian doesn't want to be hit because they don't want to be injured. So, the best thing to do is for both parties to also be aware of what to do at those instances. Always be aware, even if you're not at a crosswalk or an intersection. Be wary if you're going through a neighborhood, especially if there's children present. Children do not know the laws of the road. They've never been educated on the laws of the road. So to them, it's just everybody's, it's just another day playing around in the neighborhood. Everybody's going to know that they're there. And unfortunately, children can be hit or killed by a driver just because they chased their ball out into the street, or they were just riding their bicycle and went out in front of traffic. Anything along those lines could happen.
So early education at home would also be key to teaching responsible, just being around the roads responsibly, whether it is chasing the ball out or crossing from one side to the other. Distracted pedestrians. We've talked about the child just moments ago running out to get their ball, but living around and near, and I'm not just calling it out because it's a college town, but being in areas where there seems to be more distractibility, what are some of the suggestions you would have for pedestrians? We've talked about looking both ways, but what are some of the distractions that could lead to a dangerous intersection crossing?
Pedestrian using their cell phone can be very dangerous.
So again, no selfies?
No selfies in the middle of the street.
Okay.
You can do them on the sidewalk if you're standing still, but I would urge caution by using your cell phone by walking across the crosswalk. One, you're looking down at your cell phone. You don't have any clue where you're walking to, and you also you may have earbuds in, listening to music, or have headphones on, listening to music or a book or whatever. That can become very dangerous too, because if, let's say, for instance, you have the music turned up loud and somebody's honking at you, maybe you won't hear the honk. Or if a ambulance or a fire truck or a police officer, police car is coming through with their lights on, and you don't see them or hear them because you're distracted by your phone or you have your headphones in, then you could possibly be in the line of getting hit by one of them on the way to a call. I know in more municipalities there's tight quarters. Everything's kind of built around blocks and different areas, and it's harder to see around those corners. And you may be coming up one of the streets, and then you got a emergency vehicle coming down an avenue. If you're not paying attention or listening, you could walk out in front of them.
And your perception even of where that sound is coming from is sometimes difficult, the way it echoes off the buildings.
Yeah.
So just being alert is probably key there.
Yeah, being alert as a pedestrian is just as equally as heightened as being alert as a driver. You need to be aware that not all drivers stop at red lights. When they stop at a red light, they may, or a stop sign, they may come slowly, but then they'll speed right back up again. They won't come to a complete stop. Or they may run the red light. So, you always need to be cautious, even when you have been given the signal that it's okay to cross. As a pedestrian, also look both ways, look around you, make sure that it is clear and it is safe to cross.
A key example I always think of there is at a four-way intersection, stoplights on all four corners, you get the white walk light, but someone has the legal right to turn right on red, being aware of the vehicle that's coming from your left or rear side, turning right or rolling through. That's what always scares me, crossing in townships and areas where there is a lot of traffic with legal right-hand turns. It's the one that I always try to be keenly aware of the most, in addition to everything else, of course. But for the drivers being distracted around pedestrians, what are some of the key variables that a driver needs to consider additionally when it comes to pedestrian safety?
If a driver is distracted, say a cell phone, maybe they're eating, maybe they're doing whatever, putting makeup on, whatever they're doing, they've got at least one hand off the wheel. They aren't paying attention to the roadway, and they may think that they have control, but it only takes looking down at a cell phone or doing something else that you probably shouldn't be doing at the time to go the length of a football field in a matter of about 3 to 5 seconds, depending on how fast you're traveling. If you're traveling 50 some miles per hour, if you're traveling 30 some miles per hour, yeah, you could probably go about a half of a football field almost, or a little bit more than half of a football field. And it's like traveling that blindfolded because you're not looking. Anything can happen. A deer could pop out in front of you. We're in an area where there's a high deer population. You see roadkill all the time on the side of the roadway. So animals do not know boundaries. Animals don't know that they need to cross at a certain section or
wait for the walk light.
Wait for the walk light. You don't see deer stopping for the walk light. Deer and other animals will just jump out in front of you. So, anything could happen. A kid could pop out in front of them. You could have another car that stopped in front of them and actually yielded for somebody or a pedestrian, and then they rear end them. And then maybe even push that person into the pedestrian. So, it's equally as smart to not be distracted while driving, just as it is to not be distracted when you're walking. I trust that folks will, look both ways as a driver when I see a pedestrian, but I always make sure that they're going to stop before, and stay there before I start to go. That would be something that drivers need to look at, is making sure that the pedestrian knows that it's either not safe to cross or it is safe to cross, but if the pedestrian's going to stay over there, then the cars can go ahead and go. And typically, that's when drivers and pedestrians need to make eye contact with one another and make sure that they're on the same page.
Right, absolutely. That's your, maybe at least getting the courtesy wave.
Yeah,
or
get a courtesy
acknowledgement
wave.
that, all right, you're good to go.
Yeah.
So I think the final topic I wanted to touch on here is pedestrians getting from point A to B outside of the downtown areas, but along the roadways. It is very common in this area to see pedestrians walking, and I know there are certain laws in place of which highways, interstate, I think it's same applies, interstate style systems, pedestrian traffic is not permitted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But secondary roads, lots of them, it's just fine to travel by foot, bicycle, or whatever along the sides of the roadways. So what are some final considerations to look at? And I know a lot of this stuff is applicable in town or along secondary roads, but are there any additional considerations when you see pedestrians, say, crossing the Ohio River on the bridge where there is no sidewalk? They're on the berm.
As a driver, that would be of concern to me as a driver, and to anybody that should be when they're driving, is if there is no sidewalk, if there is no crosswalk, there is no designated area for pedestrians or bicyclists, that in itself becomes a risk. So when you're traveling down through there, don't blow by them going the speed limit. Give them the right of way, make sure that they are safe, they aren't out in the middle of traffic. If they're out in the middle of traffic, they need to get off to the side. But those in those cases, that maybe that's the only way that person has to travel is a means of walking. Maybe they've lost their privilege to drive.
Right.
That's the only way they can get around. So that in that case, law enforcement typically will not push that situation very far, but they do strongly encourage, and in highway safety we strongly encourage that folks not do that just because of their own safety.
Right.
Because a driver may not be aware that they're there, and they aren't typically there. It may be once in a blue moon that you see somebody doing that as a driver, but that person may use that route every day. I don't know. So there's that to take into consideration, and give them plenty of space when you go by them, past them. Make sure that if you have big extended mirrors on the side, you don't clip them.
Get over a little bit. Yeah.
Right, and make sure you give them plenty of room when you pass them. But then again, you need to make sure that if they are going to be crossing, especially in dark times, they need to be well lit. Wear bright clothing if you're going to be a pedestrian. Unfortunately, we have, all over the nation, folks that are killed as pedestrians because they were walking across the street in black clothing, and for whatever reason, maybe you had to have black clothing on because they came from work and they had dark clothes on from work,
Right.
and they're leaving and walking away, and but they can't possibly be seen by a driver, especially if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's really dark outside, and they have dark clothing on. It's practically seeing black on black. You can't see anything. So that causes a big problem.
Absolutely.
So wear bright clothing, wear reflective stickers, have reflective armbands, whatever you
Something
can
to
think
light
of.
yourself up in the dark.
Take a flashlight. Don't shine it in drivers' eyes, or they might hit you anyway because you blinded them with the light. But take a light with you that shines down on the ground. Have a flasher with you or something, that goes on your belt, or some of the highway safety regions hand out these flashers for their pedestrians, or some companies that you might be able to find banks that promote, or businesses that promote things and give away things. Those are some things that companies give away, and you can just grab a couple of those and keep yourself lit up. On rural roads, there's hardly any room. We have rural roads here in the tri-state that go from a mountain to a flat part for the road, and then back down the mountain. So there's nowhere to turn off onto,
Right.
or there's nowhere for a pedestrian to walk. Those cases are even extremely more dangerous than being out on a flat road that's wide open. You come around a corner and you see somebody standing there, you may not have time to react. So that's just a very cautious for all drivers to be aware of, and pedestrians, that they need to make sure that you're well lit and you are walking on the side of the roadway where you are facing the traffic, and they can see you and you can see them coming.
That's a good point as well. Make sure you're facing traffic if you do have to do that. So, Beau, thank you for joining us today. For Armstrong, I'm Shane Finster. Make it a great day.